This is Sam with OMEGAFI, and today we'll be talking about building fraternity budgets from scratch. Essentially, how to get started on a budget for your organization. Whether this is your first time making a budget or you're simply revamping the current budget that you're working with, these basic pointers will be sure to help. We're going to go over a couple of different things today, like how to prep for making a budget, the different pieces of your budget, expenses versus income, and then reviewing the budget for approval. After we've discussed these key points, we'll have a quick Q&A to go over any other budgeting questions. First, it's important to understand that the purpose of a treasurer is to oversee the management and reporting of finances, and then to preside over the financial decision-making process for your organization. You are essentially the CFO. Your purpose is not to just collect dues and pay bills. Those are some of the duties associated with being treasurer, but your main purpose is to make wise decisions in regards to financial policies and to ensure the continued financial stability of your organization. The first step to successfully fulfill your purpose as treasurer is to establish a budget. Don't do it on your own. Form a finance committee. It's recommended to include your chapter president, an assistant treasurer, an alumni advisor, and a housing corporation treasurer on your committee. This is important because you don't need or want to do it all on your own. It's important to have a finance committee for support and guidance. Then, you'll want to review the chapter goals for the year with your finance committee. Determine which goals are impacted by the chapter budget. Don't forget to review the goals for yourself as treasurer. Keep these goals in mind as you create your new budget. Doing this will help keep your work on the budget in line with the chapter's goals. Remember the purpose of a treasurer in regards to a budget. Your purpose is to make wise decisions for your organization's stability. Your main components of the budget should be the chapter's income, expenses, actuals, which is what the chapter has been bringing in and sending out, versus what has been budgeted for, and then policies, such as incentives and punishments that are outlined in your organization's bylaws. Don't work backwards. Many chapters will set chapter dues before planning and budgeting. Not only does this create an unnecessary burden on yourself and future treasurers, it hinders the growth of your organization. Essentially, this is handcuffing yourself to a certain amount that your chapter may have recently grown out of. Research and budget your expenses first, and then move on to budget for your income. Next, you'll need to do some research. Gather prior year's budgets. The more budgets, the better. At least 2 past budgets will be sufficient, though. Then, gather historical expense information and reports. For example, national dues and fees, monthly rent, the average power bill, and IFC dues. These can be collected by contacting your national office and utility companies to gather estimates for expenses such as power and insurance. Review previous charges from an old budget, specifically the charges that are constant, like your chapter dues, rent, or social dues. If your chapter has a house, remember to keep separate budgets separate. The chapter and house should be separate entities, so they would need separate budgets. This means they will have separate funds, accounts, and expenses. A budget for the house may be set by your housing corporation or alumni board. Don't forget to include this in the scheduled charges presented to your members. Now that you've finished prepping for your budget, you're ready to build your budget draft, starting with budgeting your expenses. Review fixed versus flexible expenses. Budget your fixed expenses first. These are the things that are expected to stay in good standing and debt-free. For example, insurance, national dues and fees, rent, utilities, IFC dues, and meal plans. Your flexible expenses are things like socials, brotherhood outings, and the t-shirts that are associated with your events. Flexible expenses are going to fluctuate depending on usage. We will go more in depth about flexible expenses in a minute once we reach that section for budgeting. Build in a savings plan. The key is to save early and save often. If savings is not a priority, we highly recommend making it a priority. Saving should become a habit for your chapter. Your future self and future brothers will thank you. Having savings set aside will help provide protection from unexpected expenses or anything else that may come up, such as providing a base to pay for a house improvement or even a down payment. It's recommended that chapters save 5 to 10% of their income based on charges and expenses, but this will vary based on your chapter goals. Create a contingent plan. This means planning for the unexpected, such as uncollected dues, discounts offered to members for good grades, prepayment discounts, and so on. Review historical collection rates as the base for creating a contingent plan. For example, if 5% of members don't pay their dues, use that as a line item in your expenses to account for uncollectible funds. Account for early payment discount amounts, GPA, and other discounts or incentives that are offered. Review the historical amounts or the percentage of members that also take advantage of discounts. Next, you'll want to turn your attention to flexible or variable expenses. This is where all of the fun takes place. Flexible expenses pay for the why members joined their organizations, such as formals and other social events. Review last year's events and expenses, and then look over the new budget request from your chapter's chairman. It's recommended to have each chairman and officer create their own budgets for events and costs associated with their position, such as the philanthropy chairman budgeting for this year's 5K. Approve, deny, or revise the requested amounts based on the needs and goals of the chapter. This is where your purpose comes to fruition, making wise decisions on where funds should be strategically allocated. This will also help give the chairman some ownership within the budget, which will lead to less pushback down the road. Review each budget line item to ensure that each category and chairman request aligns with the chapter goals. For example, if the goal is to increase membership, then the rush budget should typically be higher than in previous years. Begin allocating amounts to expense categories by using a template. Don't forget to use the exact expense categories. For example, rush supplies, bid cards, and rush party all fall under the recruitment expense category. Utilize the finance committee and chairman to ensure a higher sense of ownership among members. Make sure that the amounts you created are doable for your organization. To budget for income, first, make sure that you've accounted for fixed and flexible expenses, savings and contingency plans, and then make sure that you are billing enough to cover all expenses. Adjust chapter dues, rent, meal plans, and national dues and fees amounts as needed. Remember, adjustments to expenses may be necessary if an increase in dues is not an option for your chapter. If your organization can't raise dues for your members, you may need to cut some of your expenses. A tip for cutting expenses. If you have to make adjustments, it's always a good idea to get a chapter vote on where those adjustments should be made. For example, your brothers may want to reduce the amount allocated for formal in order to have more money for brotherhood events. Review policies within your bylaws, such as late fees and early payment incentives. Determine how policies such as late fees, fines, and discounts can affect member payments. These are all ways to encourage timely payments from your members. When budgeting for income, do not rely on late fees, fines, collection of a previous term's debt, or fundraising to be guaranteed. So don't include them in income budgeting. Any money received from these should be considered bonus funds, and they can go towards savings, paying off debts, or even an extra event to reward your members. Now, you can finalize the amounts to be billed to each member and establish billing and due dates. It is recommended to have the first due date of a term be on or before the first day of classes. Review due dates for big ticket items to ensure availability of necessary funds. For example, make sure to bill for national dues and fees before the bill to nationals is due. Determine how charges should be billed based on the due dates that you've set. Should you bill in installments through the term or bill the term's charges in full? If installments fit your chapter's needs, determine how much money and when that money needs to be available in order to see how installments should be structured. It is recommended to bill all charges in full before or at the beginning of a term, and then offer payment plans on an as-needed basis. After budgeting for income, you may have to come back and make adjustments to the expenses to best fit your chapter's needs and wants. This is a good time to review the chapter goals, as well as the goals for yourself as treasurer, to ensure that the budget reflects both sets of goals accordingly. It is also helpful to get a professor to review the budget that you've drafted. This will help you gain some outside perspective while also building strong relationships with your administration. Review the completed budget with the Finance Committee you've created. You should have at least 2 to 3 approvals of the budget: Finance Committee approval, Executive Board or Alumni Board approval, and approval by the chapter. Approval by the chapter is the most important since they will be the ones paying dues and reaping the benefits. Don't forget that part of your purpose is to serve their best interest. Lastly, get started early. It's recommended to finalize the next period's budget before the current period ends. For example, finalizing fall's budget before the spring semester ends. The earlier you start working on the chapter budget, the less stressful it will be. Don't create extra work for yourself by starting the budget process after the term has started. Again, don't do it alone. Use your new committee and alumni for support. That wraps up our webinar on building fraternity budgets from scratch. Thank you for watching. Our Q&A will begin shortly, so please let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to contact OMEGAFI for any other concerns or if you'd like some one-on-one help with your chapter budget. You can always reach out to your account manager or customer success manager for any help. We look forward to holding another webinar soon.